How many of you went back over all of the anchored teachings from Genesis 37 to Genesis 44 this week? Just raise your hand.
Forgot.
What, no one? I'm so disappointed in all of you. But if I'm being honest, I didn't either. But after last week, I think we're fine. I think that caught us up quite well. And really all I want you to know heading into tonight's teaching is just a refresher on where we dropped out of the study last week, Genesis 44. Joseph's brothers had made their second trip to Egypt. In Genesis 43 and Genesis 44, everything was going so well. You know, there was the banquet with the prime minister of Egypt. They were leaving on a high note, and just as they were getting ready to leave, Joseph had set them up to frame them, and he sprung the trap right as they were leaving and heading home back to Canaan. And they dragged Benjamin, and the boys come along, the other brothers, back to stand before the prime minister. And that's where we left off. The seemingly stolen silver cup there in the mouth of Benjamin's sack. The brothers of Joseph absolutely petrified, not sure how this is all going to turn out. And then it finally happened. His brothers finally break. And Judah steps up and he gives a open and honest word of confession. And then that passionate plea for Benjamin's freedom. And that's where we stopped our study, and that's where we pick up tonight. So tonight in Genesis 45, we get the full reveal. There's a lot of revelation in this chapter. You could break this up with the obvious stuff. For example, we could say that we finally get the full revelation of Joseph's person in verses 1 through 4, the full revelation of Joseph's pardon in verses 5 through 8, full revelation of Joseph's provision in verses 9 through 24, and then to break up the alliteration a little bit, Jacob's response to all of that to close out the chapter in verses 25 through 28. But there's more revelation than just those things. Because as we look at what's happening, as we watch Joseph, this incredible, wonderful man of God with a heart of gold, as we watch him responding to his brothers and handling situations, we get revelations about a whole bunch of other stuff too. Like love and forgiveness. All sorts of good stuff we need to know as God's people that are doing life together with the rest of God's people. So let's take a look beginning at verse 1, and we'll see what we have time to uncover here tonight. Verse 1, then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him. And he cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. Verse 2, and he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard it. Now, this is one of those stories that when I get to heaven, I want to see the replay of this. Just this moment right here in the story, because I want to see all of their faces. That would be so classic. First of all, I think the faces of his brothers, when Joseph gets to the point where his heart is just exploding and he can't continue on in the game any longer, and he's got to make the reveal. And he makes that statement there in the room, if you're Egyptian, get out of the room. I want the room alone with these Jewish boys. And I can just picture the faces of his Jewish brothers. They had to be thinking at this point, that's it. We are toast. We have finally pushed this guy too far, and he has flipped, he has snapped, he is going to kill us. And then you have the faces that we don't get to see or we don't get to read about, but the faces of the Egyptians as they're put outside the room, not knowing what Joseph has in mind, what Joseph's going to do. And then, I just picture them with their ears up to the doors listening in. What's happening in there? Is that crying? Is that Joseph? Is that Joseph in there blubbering like a baby? What in the world is going on in that room? I want to see that so bad. And I hope that the Lord will give me that replay when I get to heaven. Now, why do you think that Joseph wanted everyone out? All of the Egyptians, everyone out but him and his brothers. Now, I guess some people would kind of grab the obvious here and say, I think that it was because Joseph did not want his Egyptian friends and, underlings to see him cry. Because everyone knows grown men don't cry. And if they saw him cry, then how could he have the confidence in the future that they would continue to think he is the macho, strong leader that he was? A lot of people think that. I don't really think that adds up. I think that's pretty doubtful. Joseph has to know that as they step outside the room, they're going to hear him crying like a baby. I don't think that's it. I don't think he was afraid to show emotion. First of all, different culture. The men in that culture had no problem showing emotion like the men in our culture do. They had no problem being loving and affectionate. They had no problem weeping when they were sad. Different culture, different time. We're the culture with that problem, not them. I suggest to you that the reason he did this is because this is textbook love. This is love by the book. What we're seeing in Joseph and how he is handling this situation, this is how genuine love always handles its matters of restoration and forgiveness. Let me explain what I mean. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Sound familiar, Barry and Megan? 1 Corinthians 13. We just did premarital counseling yesterday. Good news, I still think, even after hearing me talk about marriage, they still want to get married. So thank the Lord for that. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, right there in verse 4, Paul says, love does not parade itself. Just listen to this, okay? Just collect these facts as we go. Love does not parade itself. And then in verse 6, I guess we don't have that mic problem solved completely. Then in verse 6, Paul says, love does not rejoice in iniquity. So listen to this anchored. Love handles its matters of restoration and forgiveness without without embarrassing the offending party. Love handles its matters of restoration and forgiveness without parading the sins of others in open public. It does so without rejoicing in the failures of others. We could just say it like this. It does so without rubbing it in that you failed. You know what I mean? If you have to parade the sins of others to other people, if you have to tell people how others have wronged you, if that's what's on your mind and on your heart when you're speaking to people, or if you get some sort of sick, twisted kick out of the failures of others and watching them in their misery because they failed, then I'll just be honest with you. You don't love them and you haven't forgiven them. And conversely, you know that your love and forgiveness is at least growing, is at least maturing when you can talk about someone that has wronged you without telling people how they've wronged you, without parading it. You know, I like that brother or sister. Well, yeah, but, a couple years ago, 22 years ago to be exact, they said and did this and they offended me and it was terrible. And but I forgave them. No. The sign that you're really loving and forgiving is when you can talk about that person that has offended you without bringing up that old wound. So that's love. And that's how love handles forgiveness and restoration. That's growth. And I do believe that's what we're seeing here. I do believe that's why he shut the Egyptians out. It was a moment of privacy. They did not need to know how his brothers had failed him. Verse 3, then Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. What a moment. I think personally it's one of the most powerful moments in the book of Genesis. The whole time they thought they were just speaking to some unknown Egyptian ruler. He was speaking in the Egyptian language, and he was speaking to them through an interpreter the whole time. What a shock it must have been to hear in the Hebrew tongue from his mouth, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph. What a shock that must have been. First of all, what? He speaks Hebrew? He knew Hebrew this whole time? You ever do that? You're talking around people, then you're pretty sure they only speak Spanish. Then you find out at the end of your conversation, they know English too. Well, that's what they just found out. And here's the thing, he drops the name, Joseph. There's no way he could have picked up on this information from anything they said, because if you read back through Genesis and those chapters there where the brothers are standing before Joseph, as you should have done for your homework but didn't, if you read back through that, you would see not once did they drop their brother's name. Anytime they speak about Joseph to Joseph, here's all they'll say: we are 12 brothers and one of us is no more. How could he know the name? He drops the name. Look at this, reading on in verse 3. Joseph, one of his most important bits of information that he wants, he asks, does my father still live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. I guess so. They're absolutely dumbfounded. That's another translation of the word dismayed. They are dumbfounded in his presence. They are absolutely speechless. He's asking them a question and they're just, they don't know what to say. They're in shock, utter shock. Verse 4, and Joseph said to his brothers, please come near to me. So they came near. Then he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Whoa. They didn't give that information to Joseph before either, or I should say this prime minister that they didn't realize was Joseph. They conveniently left that part out of the story. Oh yeah, we sold our brother into slavery. These were two bits and pieces of information that only Joseph himself would have known. So here he is. He looks Egyptian. This prime minister that they've been talking to all of this time, he looks different than the Joseph that they remember. He's got that smooth-skinned Egyptian thing going on, clean-shaven. He's got the fancy Egyptian headwear and all the fancy Egyptian garb, but he has named the name and he has named the crime. Two things he could not have known otherwise. So they know right here, right now, this is the real deal. This crazy turn of events, this crazy world that we live in, this is Joseph, our brother. He's been the prime minister all along. And what does that bring? What response does that bring to them immediately? Remorse. Absolute remorse. They are convinced and convicted. Technically, those are the same words. They mean the same thing, convinced and convicted. But for sake of rhetoric, they're convinced and they're convicted. They're convinced that it is Joseph. They know it is. And number two, they're convicted of their crime, their sin against Joseph. That's the first gut level response they get. It's why Joseph's statement in verse 5, his next statement, is so important. As they're just beginning to feel that overwhelming, consuming emotion of guilt and remorse. He says this, but now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. And we get to see right away the forgiveness that is in Joseph's heart. And let's just add this to what we are learning about how genuine love handles forgiveness and restoration. Look at this. It lets the other person off the hook. It puts them at ease and doesn't hold anything over their heads. It's not one of those fake attempts at forgiveness where you say you forgive them or you appear to forgive them, but you do still enjoy watching them squirm. If that's any part of your love and forgiveness toward another person, if you're wanting the appearance of forgiveness, but the joy of their misery, then you're kidding yourself. Once again, you're not really there yet. The appearance of forgiveness and the reality of it are two different things. It's probably one of the most common questions I get as a pastor. How do I forgive? And I say, I don't know, and we pray and we go our way. No, it's a tough question. How do I really forgive? It's just a matter of the will. And the more control you have over your will, the quicker and easier that can happen. But the less control you have over your will, the longer this can take. So it can mean every day saying in your heart or out loud, I choose to forgive that person. And continuing to do that until your emotions follow the decisions of your will. It's a tough one. But Joseph, my goodness, no problem with it all. Reading on in verse 5, for God sent me before you to preserve life. Verse 6, for these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. That's 7 years total, because we know that Egypt was going to go through 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine. So they are 2 years into that 7-year period of famine. Verse 7, and God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Verse 8, so now it was not you who sent me here, not really, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and Lord of all his house and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Joseph is not completely ignoring their part in all this. He's just simply saying, God's planning for me to be here was bigger than the human plotting that got me here. So here it is. It's part of Joseph's faith. And it's what helped him through all of those years of challenges and trials that he went through. It's right here. It's this: God's sovereignty. Joseph believes in God's sovereignty through and through. And as a direct result, he could go through every challenge, every difficulty, every unpleasant situation that he was in life. He could go through it and he could come out of it not bitter, because that whole time, instead of letting bitterness roll around in his heart and turn into something deeper and darker and more sinister, instead he just patiently waited and watched, because he believed this: no matter what people do to me, no matter what difficulties I come to in life, God is high above all of that. God protects me, God takes care of me, and God only allows stuff to happen to me that God can work with, that God can do wonderful things through. So essentially, Joseph is the advanced prefiguring of Romans 8:28, that verse we all know so well. All things work together for the good of those that love God, for the good of those that are called according to his purpose. That's Joseph right there. It is a strong faith that God is in complete control, even when it seems like mankind or the enemy has taken over. He knows. Joseph knows, as you should know, as Job found out, No plot against him could be successful unless the Lord said, okay, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and do that. Let that happen. I can work big in that situation. Joseph will say in Genesis 50, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. This guy really gets it. He understands something that we really need to understand, and that is that life runs two simultaneous storylines, and that we got to be extremely careful about which storyline we hang our hat on. We have the view from earth, ground zero, where there are events, occurrences, circumstances, and situations. But then there's the view from the sky, from the throne, where superseding all of that, the little individual things, all of the negatives that add up, superseding all of that is God's control over the situation totally, God's will at work in your life, and God's ability to take all of that, tie it back together, and cause from that good to come from it in your life. Those who lack this insight about God's sovereignty, they say, tough stuff has happened to me. But those who have this insight about God's sovereignty, that they really get it and really believe it, they don't say, tough stuff happened to me. They say this, I wonder what God is going to do now. The situation in human terms, humanly speaking, the situation is bad. I just wonder what God is going to do. I know God is going to flip this. I know God is going to do something. I know God is going to turn it. And so if you know that going into every situation, you can maintain your peace going through it. That's the big payoff for someone like Joseph. He didn't get drugged through slavery and prison, kicking and screaming, why me? Why God? Why did you do this? Why did you allow this? He went through with peace in his heart, just being a man of God, going through anything the Lord called him to face, knowing that the day was going to come when God would flip it, and God did. And look at him now. He's a father figure to the most powerful man in the whole world, the Egyptian Pharaoh. The Pharaoh looks up to him. He's Pharaoh's advisor. If Pharaoh has a question, I got to know what Joseph thinks. What an incredible thing the Lord has done. But I love this about Joseph. He's not going to say, Pharaoh made me lord over Egypt. He says, God did. I love that. He's not crediting his brothers for the negatives. And likewise, he's not crediting himself for the positives. The negatives, that's a tough enough challenge. Joseph, your brothers are jerks. They sold you into slavery for a measly 20 pieces of silver. No, God was moving me. Well, things started to go well as a servant. You started to get promoted. Then you ended up falsely accused and falsely imprisoned, all because of your brothers. Your brothers caused this. Your brothers did this to you. No, God was moving me. Well, okay, on the positive side, how about this then, Joseph? Every negative that you faced, you handled as a man of God. You rose above it. You were promoted. You worked your way up. You climbed the ladder. Joseph once again would shut that down and say, nope, wrong again. It wasn't me. It was God. God was moving me step by step and getting me exactly where He wanted me for this moment. I wish that lesson was not so hard for us to understand. Why is that so tough? Joseph is the perfect model, and we can learn so much from him. So I'll just say this before we move on to the next verse. Don't kick and scream the whole way through. That ruins the fun. Embrace this as an adventure. It's kind of like the secret to life. When you know God is in control, when you know nothing negative is going to happen to you that God hasn't put His signature on, you have deep insight into living your life that should help you. You should be able to go through everything with a smile and confidence, not in yourself, but in the Lord. Arlyn, why are you so happy? There's been some horrible things that happened to you. Look what so-and-so did to you. No, God was setting me up. God was moving me. God was positioning me. Now, I know this is going to sound like a prosperity teacher for a second, but it's true. God lines up everything in your life, every detail, to bring you into a place of absolute good and absolute blessing. That's what He'll do. And if you don't go kicking and screaming the whole way, you get to enjoy the ride. You get to enjoy the adventure with Him. Verse 9, hurry. That's what you're saying about this teaching too. Hurry. Verse 9, hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God, see, who made him Lord over all Egypt? Who does Joseph credit with it? He says, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not tarry. Verse 10, you shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me, you and your children, your children's children, your flocks and your herds, and all that you have. Verse 11, there I will provide for you, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty, for there are still 5 years of famine. We're not out of this famine yet. We're only 2 years into it. And you need to get down here near to me. We'll put you in the land of Goshen, and there I can take care of you. I can provide for you. You won't come to poverty. The family line will be strong. The Jewish seed will go on in health. Now, if you've studied through Exodus, Goshen probably sounds familiar to you. It's that area at the top of Egypt, we would say, as we're looking at it on the map, right up there by the delta, the mouth of the Nile, as it splits out in multiple sections. You've probably seen that on a map. It is the luscious spot in Egypt. So what Joseph has done is he has promised the luscious spot in Egypt to his family. Come up here, get in Goshen, you're gonna love it there. It was a prime spot to raise sheep. And oh, by the way, guess what Joseph's family does for a living? They raise sheep. A wonderful place to be. And so they're going to come up to Goshen, just a handful of them. And they're going to be there for over 400 years. That's going to carry us into the book of Exodus. When we pick up at Exodus 1, that's where we start. The nation of Israel has become a nation, not just a family anymore. They went to Goshen as Joseph called for them here. They were there for over 400 years, 430 years there in Goshen. And they go from a handful to millions. And they're going to be there a long time. And that's going to be the spot that the Lord is eventually going to deliver them out of once a new Pharaoh comes to town, a Pharaoh that does not know Joseph. So it's a lush spot. It's a wonderful spot. Joseph is giving them the prime pick in all of Egypt. And let's see, what verse are we on? We read verse 11. And we're going to verse 12. Before we do move on to verse 12, I want to say that I do believe that the typology holds true here. And I think it's more than typology at this point. I think it's prophecy. As Stephen points out, and as we mentioned in some of our past Genesis studies, in Stephen's sermon there in Acts chapter 7, right there at verse 13, Stephen points out that Joseph was made known to his Jewish brothers the second time. And Stephen means the second time they came to see Joseph, that's when Joseph was revealed to his brothers, as we just covered here at the beginning of Genesis 45. And as prophecy would have it, we see the same thing for the Jewish nation. It is predicted, having known that by and large the Jews rejected Jesus at his first coming, we have that same prediction that when Jesus returns in his second coming, shortly before that, we know the Jewish nation is going to come back to the knowledge, they're going to come to, I should say, the knowledge that Jesus really is their Messiah. It's just like the story of Joseph. Joseph was there in the presence of his brothers and they didn't recognize him. They couldn't see it. Same thing with the nation of Israel at his first coming. There, those first century Jews did not receive Jesus. They rejected him. He was right there, God in flesh, Messiah in flesh, to deliver them, and they could not see who he really was. But the scriptures teach us, don't they, that during the tribulation period, interesting, quite interesting, the tie-ins, that 7 years of tribulation that the nation of Israel is going to go through, that is going to be the opener. Paul says that the Jew is partially blinded right now, but during that time, those Jews that don't believe, they're going to have their eyes open during the tribulation period. Now, just look at this chronologically. I've never seen any other Bible scholar or commentator or anything suggest this, but I think I see a link here, an undeniable link that gives us an idea on the time frame. Now, I could be completely wrong and setting myself up for embarrassment, but when do the brothers of Joseph have the revelation of who he really is? In the second year of the 7 years of famine. And I just think, I have the suspicion that it's going to hold true in the type and in the prophecy, and that in the second year of the 7 years of tribulation, that's when we're going to start to see the Jews come around to their Messiah. I'm talking the Jews en masse, believing and understanding that Jesus is the Messiah. If you follow the flow of the book of Revelation, I think that's essentially what you see. There in Revelation chapter 6, we see the Jews being sealed for future protection through the tribulation period. And that takes place right near the end of that first set of 7 judgments. Right? There's 3 sets of 7 judgments in the book of Revelation, and it follows that flow. The first 7 sets of judgments are the seal judgments, as Christ rips the seals off of that scroll. With every seal that's removed, there's a corresponding judgment taking place on the earth. The second set of judgments, the second set of 7, is the trumpet judgments. And then the final set of 7 judgments is known as the bowl judgments. Well, right there at the end of that first set of 7, those seal judgments, we see the Jews being sealed by God. And then what we see as we follow the flow of Revelation is from that point forward, God protecting the Jews, the believing Jews, through the tribulation period. And you'll notice that chapter 11 is the halfway marker of the tribulation period. That when you get to that chapter, and John is told to measure the temple, get out there with his measuring stick and measure the temple, and leave the courtyard out, because the Gentiles have that for how much longer? 3.5 years, the second part of the tribulation. So I think we find that fits good. I think it's going to be right there about the 2-year mark in the 7 years of tribulation that the Jewish brothers of Jesus en masse are going to come to the knowledge. This is him, not Joseph. This is Jesus, the greater than Joseph. This is our Messiah. Our brothers in the first century missed him the first time, but we see now this is the Messiah. Verse 12, and behold, your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see that it is my mouth that speaks to you. Examine my features. Look close. They're having trouble believing. Look, this isn't the face of an Egyptian. Look close. Look at my mouth. That's Dad's mouth. This is a Jewish face, right? Verse 13, so you shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt and of all that you have seen, and you shall hurry and bring my father down here. Now quickly here, if we just flip back mentally in our minds to the typology, I'll make this connection. The Heavenly Father knows the glory of his Son, Jesus. He doesn't have to be told how wonderful his Son is. He knows. But it blesses his heart. I could make a strong scriptural case for this. It blesses the Father's heart when we humans gush about his Son, Jesus, to him. You parents can relate to this. I can personally relate to this. For example, I know the truth. And my kids are the greatest kids on earth ever. I know that. Just as the Father knows the glory of Jesus, I know the glory of my kids. They're amazing. And yet it blesses my heart in a special way when someone comes up to me and compliments my kids. You know what I mean? You know how good that feels? You know how wonderful your kids are. They're not as good as mine, but you know how wonderful they are. But how awesome when someone comes up to you and says, I just got to tell you something about your kids. They're amazing. You know, the Father is the same way. I think we should be doing that as believers in Christ. When we approach the Father in prayer, we should be gushing over His Son, Jesus. We should be telling the Father, though He knows, we should be telling the Father the glory that we see in Jesus. We should be telling the Father what Jesus has done for us, just as these brothers are going to go back and say, Dad, you're not going to believe it. Joseph is this amazing guy, and he's alive, and he forgave us. He loves us. Yeah, Dad, we probably should tell you what we did. He's forgiven us. He loves us. He's brought restoration to us. I think the Father loves to hear the same thing about His Son. Father, Jesus has forgiven me. I was a creep. I was a sinner. He forgave me. He restored me to relationship with you. Everything that Jesus has done, I'm just going to gush over it to the Father, and the Father's going to say, so sweet. Just like those Old Testament sacrifices, a sweet smelling savor to the Lord, a sweet aroma in His nostrils. Us human beings recognizing the glory of Jesus and sharing that with the Father. Verse 14, then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck. Ouch. Always sounds painful when you read it like that. Fell on his brother's neck and wept. Shouldn't it be Benjamin that's weeping? No. All right, so we know that means he grabbed him around the neck affectionately and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. 15. Moreover, he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. And after that, his brothers talked with him. Verse 16. Now the report of it was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brothers have come. So it pleased Pharaoh and his servants well. Verse 17. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this. Load your animals and depart. Go to the land of Canaan, verse 18. Bring your father and your households and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt. Pharaoh might not have known it, but Joseph already promised that anyway. I'll give you the best of the land of Egypt. Joseph's going, whew. And you will eat the fat, the abundance of the land. Verse 19. Now you are commanded, do this, take carts. That would be wagons. Take carts out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and your wives. Bring your father and come. So that is essentially moving and having your relocation expenses covered. I always had trouble with that when I was taking a new job. Especially up there in Alaska. When you move from city to city in Alaska, it is an ordeal. Because you probably have to fly or ferry from one place to another. First thing I'd always ask, if I do take this job, are relocation expenses covered? No. Okay, that's what I figured. They never are. But that's what's happening here. Relocation expenses are covered. Jacob's family, they don't have to rent U-Hauls. Because Pharaoh is sending the carts. He's sending the empty wagons. And he's telling them, load up your stuff from home. Here's the wagons. Here's the U-Hauls. Load your stuff up. Bring them up here. Verse 20. Also, do not be concerned about your goods. Don't worry about your stuff. That is a full sermon right there in and of itself. Don't worry about your stuff. God has somewhere for you to be. God has a big plan for you in Goshen. Get to where God wants you. Don't worry about your stuff. Don't worry about possessions. And, if something happens that you have to leave behind, the Pharaoh says this, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. 21. Then the sons of Israel did so. And Joseph gave them carts according to the command of Pharaoh, and he gave them provisions for the journey. He gave to all of them, to each man, changes of garments. But to Benjamin, he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. Here we go again. You're thinking, I thought we were done with the test over jealousy. I mean, isn't this going to stir up jealousy again? He tried this test. They passed it once. Why press the issue? Joseph, are you still trying to start something here? What's happening? Isn't the testing over? The 10 brothers of Leah, what do they get? A new change of clothes. Big deal. What does Benjamin get? 5 new changes of clothes. And what was it? 300 pieces of silver? So he gets a bunch of money. And he gets 5 new changes of new threads. Obvious favoritism, right? It is. It is, but it's understandable because the 10 brothers from Leah are Joseph's half-brothers. So this makes sense. Benjamin is his only full-blooded brother, and the wonderful thing now is that his 10 brothers from Leah, his 10 half-brothers, they've had such drastic changes of heart that there's not going to be envy. There's not going to be jealousy. The competition is over. The comparison between the two, it's all gone. None of it's there. And all for one good reason. Do you know what it is? They understand that Joseph has dealt with them through great mercy and grace. They know what they deserve. And they know that Joseph didn't give them what they deserved. They deserved, well, something horrible for what they did to him. And so they are quite content with Benjamin being favored right now because as they examine their own lives, they're saying, hey, Joseph and us 10 kids, there's no problem. We are quite content with the way that Joseph dealt with us. There are 3 ways that Joseph could have dealt with his 10 brothers. There are 3 ways that God could deal with us. There's justice, there's mercy, and there's grace. And they're all different things. Justice would be eye for eye, tooth for tooth. You know, you do the wrong, you're in trouble. You pay. Mercy is not getting the bad that you deserve. And grace is a step further. It's getting the good that you don't deserve. Let me give you an example. On me and Maggie's second trip back from Gettysburg this year. Believe it or not, we've been there 3 times already. We really did like that quarantine period. That was fun. That was nice. But on our second trip back, I was coming through that area that's just a mess, just a cluster right there in Cumberland. You know, everything else outside of that from either direction for miles and miles at 70 miles an hour. Then you get to Cumberland and everything slows up and the speed limit changes and goes down to 2 miles per hour. At least that's what it feels like after you've been driving 70 for 2 hours. And I don't like going through there. I don't like to slow my pace. I've got truck driving in my blood, so I want to just pedal down and keep going, right? Well, there I am. I'm coming through. We got through the Cumberland part heading back, and we topped the hill, and we started down the hill, and I said to Maggie, you know, kind of like famous last words thing. I said to Maggie, I know that somewhere here, this speed limit changes to 65, and then it goes up to 70 pretty quick after that. But I said, I think, Maggie, I might have missed a speed limit sign. I'm pretty sure it's 65 miles an hour right here. And I said, if not, I know for sure once we come down this hill and come to the top of the next one, I know it's 65 up there, but I'm pretty sure it's 65. So onto the gas pedal I went. Off to the races. 65 miles an hour. Glad I wasn't choosing to speed over 65 because this would have been worse. When we come down over a certain part of the hill, we looked and there were like 3 or 4 or 5 or 20 cop cars. The troopers were down there and they were shooting radar. And I saw them go like this, point to me and go like that. And for a minute I thought, he's not even in his car. I could probably take off and get off the next exit before he catches me. But I pulled over. He had 3 choices on how he could deal with me. Just to define these 3 different things. Number 1, he could have given me justice. He asked me if I knew what speed I was going. Why did they ask you that? I hate that. Do you know how fast you were going? Yeah, I'd rather not say. You know that. So I said, my bad. You got me. I thought that the speed limit was 65 here. I thought that because that's what I wanted to believe. I thought that the speed limit was 65 here, but you got me. And I just fessed up. First of all, cops aren't used to hearing that. They're used to all the excuses. I just fessed right up, you got me. So justice would be, here's your ticket. You went over the speed limit. You broke the law. Here's your ticket. Mercy would have been, okay, you were going too fast. You broke the law, but I'm going to let you off with a warning. You were wrong. Justice would be, you get the ticket, but I'm going to let you off with a warning. Grace would have been, hey, not only am I going to let you off from the ticket, but I'd like to take you to dinner right now. Pick a place, fancy, expensive place, and I'll buy you a meal. That's grace. So you see the difference? Justice, getting what you deserve. Mercy, not getting the punishment, the bad that you deserve. Grace, getting the good that you don't deserve. If you're wondering, by the way, he did let me off with a warning. He didn't take me out to eat and pay for my meal, but he did let me off with a warning. He come back and he said, you're the first person today that we pulled over that had a perfect, pristine record. And you're the first person we're letting go. He said, I don't want to mess your record up. I said, great, thank you. I don't deserve it. I appreciate it. So that's the difference right there. Joseph could have dealt with his brothers in any three of those ways. The Lord could deal with us in any of those ways. And it's foolish for us to say, Lord, give me what I deserve. You don't want to say that. You don't ever want to say that. Lord, haven't I been a good servant? Just give me what I deserve. You better watch your words very carefully. You don't pray pure justice in that case. You pray for mercy and grace. And so that's what causes you to lose that envy, that jealousy over how God is blessing other people. We've been talking along those lines and all around that topic. But if you're struggling with, man, my life just doesn't seem to be as blessed as brother or sister so-and-so over in the other corner. Why does it seem like God shows favoritism there and rewards and blesses them, and here I am puttering through life and struggling? Well, that's the cure for that. Just a step back from it all and taking a good hard look at, number one, did God give you justice? Only in the sense that Christ paid for your sins, and God calls that justice if you'll come to him for forgiveness. But what did God give you? God gave you mercy. He forgave your sins. He restored you, just as Joseph did his brothers. And God gave you grace. He's now pouring blessings out onto your life. And when you get back to that, when you start examining that, then you lose, just like Joseph's brothers. Maybe Jason's too, I don't know. Then you lose that competition, that comparison, that envy, and that jealousy with other brothers and sisters. And you can start to just enjoy it when brothers and sisters in the fellowship are honored above you. And you know what? Furthermore, it's great training for heaven. Because we're going to heaven, and we all have some common ground. We've all been forgiven. We've all been saved. We've all had the goodness of God poured into our life in some measure on this earth while we live now. And we all get heaven. So those are our commonalities. But when it comes to rewards, when it comes to honor in heaven, rewards are God's business. And we're rewarded by merit, which means get used to it now. If you're looking at that brother and sister and saying, Lord, it sure seems like you're favoring that person and you're not dealing with us equally, good. Learn from it. You're preparing for heaven, because when you get to heaven, brothers and sisters are going to be rewarded more than you. Brothers and sisters are going to be honored in heaven more than you. And the great thing about heaven is no one is going to be up there complaining and grumbling about unfair treatment. No one's going to be mumbling about, why does Denny have a bigger mansion than me? Why did Paul get more trophies than me? No, we're just going to be so thrilled and contented to see our brothers and sisters honored above us. We're going to say, right on, they deserve it. Lord, you made the right call in those rewards. So practice that now. Good preparation for heaven. Verse 23. And he sent to his father these things, 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and food for his father for the journey. Verse 24. So he sent his brothers away, and they departed. And he said to them, see that you do not become troubled along the way. Why would he tell them that? See that you do not become troubled along the way. The Hebrew word here means to stir up. Guys, on your journey home, make sure you don't get yourself all stirred up and all worked up. Why would he say that? Because he knows they have a lot of time to think. And he knows there's the potentiality that thought is going to creep back up in their minds. Wait a minute, guys, this is Joseph. Think about what we've done to him. We wrecked this guy's life. He lost over 20 years with Dad. He lost over 20 years of home life. He's been a slave. He's been in prison. He's gone through hell on earth. That's our fault. And think about it. Connect the dots. Look at how he's been jerking our chain. Look at the runaround he's been giving us. Look at all of the anxiety he's intentionally put us through. And they're going to start to think maybe this nice guy thing is just an act. It's just more of a setup. Joseph says, no, don't let your hearts get all stirred up and get all worked up. Here's the truth. You're forgiven. I love you. The promises I'm making to you, the provisions I'm guaranteeing you, it's all the real deal. So don't let thoughts trouble you out of the enjoyment of what is reality. Such a powerful lesson in there for us. I wish I could go on about it. You're saying, praise the Lord. He's out of time and he can't. But my goodness, the same thing with the Lord. I'll just say this, the same thing with the Lord. He's promised you forgiveness, salvation. He's promised you provision. He's promised you a wonderful future. And where we get ourselves into trouble is where we get along the way and we let ourselves get all stirred up, all troubled over the fact that just can't be true. It's too good to be true, isn't it? How could God forgive me? Look at what I did. How could God love me? How could God bless my life? How could God promise me heaven? It sounds too good to be true, but it's true. Just as Joseph sounded too good to be true to his brothers, but he was true. So, verse 25. Then they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to Jacob their father. Verse 26. And they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart stood still. His heart skipped a couple beats, and that's not a good thing at his age. Matter of fact, it's not a good thing at anyone's age if your heart stops and skips a few beats. Can you imagine the shock of hearing that? Dad, we're back. We're back from Egypt. Guess what? The prime minister of Egypt that we've been telling you about, you're not going to believe this, Dad. Glad you're sitting down. It's Joseph. He's the ruler over all of Egypt. Reading on, his heart stood still. Jacob's heart stood still because he did not believe them. I mean, it was just too good to be true. Just like your salvation. But it's true. Verse 27. But when they told him all the words which Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts, the wagons, the Egyptian wagons roll into town, which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. Spiritual CPR. The heart started beating again. The lungs started breathing again. 28. Then Israel said, and just notice that. Do you see right there in the passage, the section we just read, when Jacob didn't believe, what does the scripture call him? Jacob. But when Jacob does believe, what does the scripture call him? Israel. What does Jacob mean? I do my own thing by my own ingenuity. I'm a heel snatcher. I'm a tricky guy. I'm a con man. What does Israel mean? Governed by God. When he's acting like Jacob, he gets called Jacob. When he's acting like God's governed man, he's called Israel. And he says, it is enough. I'm convinced now. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. That was all he wanted for 20 years, pining away after his son, which wasn't a good thing. It wasn't a healthy thing. I get it. I understand. But not a healthy thing. And there's a good irony to this that sort of proves out that point. The irony is this. As you see Joseph say, I'm going to go see Joseph. He's alive. Great. Wonderful. I'm going to go see him and then I'm going to die. He knows he doesn't have much time. At the end of Genesis chapter 49, Jacob's going to kick the bucket, which means he doesn't have much time with Joseph for this, this reunion. And think about the irony there. He's pined away 20 plus years of his life just wanting Joseph, just wanting to see Joseph, just wanting to have Joseph back, thinking that he was dead. And now he finds out Joseph's not dead, and he gets a little bit of time with Joseph, just a little bit. But then after that little bit of time, Jacob dies and goes to be in paradise. And you got to be thinking, at that point, I think Jacob would be thinking, maybe it was quite an earthly perspective for me to be that brokenhearted about Joseph's quote-unquote death. I think if I were Jacob at that point, I would be thinking, man, I waited all these years to see Joseph. Then I see him. Now I die. I'm in eternity. And now I got to wait on Joseph again. I bet at that point he's thinking, Lord, maybe it would have been good had Joseph passed, because right now in eternity, I'd get eternity with him in paradise. It's such a human thing, such a flaw in the human psyche for us to think that life on earth is the most important thing, that life on earth is the thing to be desired, when the reality is that heaven is the thing to be desired.